BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. Well, we are now in the middle of January, and there is a giant snowstorm going on outside my window as we speak, and the snowplow is just passing me by. And also, everybody I know has been sick more than once. I was under the weather a couple weeks ago, and some of you will remember that. Whatever happened before then has returned, only a little bit lighter this time around. So let's see how this recording goes, but I hope everybody is well, and hope everybody is avoiding these winter problems. But I can't complain about the snow because I would so much rather have snow than rain. Well, welcome to the Zodiac Killer News Report for this week's Zodiac Monday. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And the first announcement that I have for you guys is that there are two new Zodiac Killer books that I would like to talk to you about. And one of them is called Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards. And this one is by Jason Hughes. This one is actually available on the website drivethrurpg.com. And this is a website that I haven't used before, but once again, the title of this book is Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards. So we're going to see some connections, specifically tying Edward Wayne Edwards as a suspect in the writing of the letters. And I'm going to read the description for you right now. Studying the Zodiac letters and mapping out clues and cryptic messages, an attempt to decode the life of a serial murder letter writer who used rituals in his crimes. New theories and patterns which placed this criminal as the 1970s Zodiac. Well, as I said in the intro, the Zodiac also operated in 1968 and 69, and the letters definitely started in 1969, so I'm quite curious how this one's going to go. Edward Wayne Edwards was a con man serial killer, and he left clues at the crime scenes. Cryptic letters with puzzles and anagrams with references to his other crimes, a combination of lies and misdirection, evil symbols to cause controversy and conspiracy, a graphic exploration of the letters, investigations and understanding the logic behind a murderer who painted a crime scene with words. Prepare for the Riddler of our century. One more time, this is the book Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards. And the next one that I would like to talk to you about here on Zodiac Monday is one that I've only mentioned briefly, but it's one that's written by longtime BBOR follower Carl Carras, and you might find this under the name C.G. Carras. And this is called The Zodiac Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes. And both of these guys are zoning in on the fact that the Zodiac Killer was not only a serial killer, he also wrote letters, he created cryptograms or ciphers, as well as greeting cards and diagrams. And if anything, it's the Zodiac Killer communications that perhaps have had a larger impact on these types of investigations, and I might even spend more time on Zodiac Monday discussing the letters and communications as opposed to the actual murders committed by the Zodiac Killer, and I don't think that that's an accident. And firstly, I don't think that's an untrue statement at all, because the Zodiac put so much effort into writing these letters, and there have been roughly dozens of communications that have been authenticated. But I'm going to read the description for you here for this book. The book, one more time, is called The Zodiac Murderers, Histories and Ciphers and Crimes by Carl Carras, and it says, a group theory of the Zodiac case is proposed. The basis of this book is presented with the first solution of the 340 cryptogram from 2017 and the process involved in cracking it. Pieces of the solution have led to some startling discoveries. Links to counter-intel in the syndicate are studied. Suspect Larry King, connections to the mob, and the entertainment world are explored. 3 other suspects are named, including that of a co-creator and a mastermind of the team. The crimes are examined for clues to the team motive and each suspect's personal reason for participating. Letters and cards are analyzed for confirmation of Zodiac authorship and crimes in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s, which is the backdrop for one of the most important mysteries in true crime. In the end, a very satisfying answer will be provided, evidence that moves the case closer to being solved. And thank you to C.G. Carras for writing this book. And the Zodiac Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes is one that I will be discussing next week on Zodiac Monday. So I invite everybody to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with these Zodiac Killer discussions. And please tune in to next week's Zodiac Monday, where I will be discussing Carl Carras's book here. So I would like to move on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report, and I have to give a shout out to David L., who sent this to me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, but there's also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, and he shared something that I'm going to try and describe for the listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can download this program under the name Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast, but this is one where he wanted to show the versatility of the Zodiac Killer's symbol. He wanted to show that all of the letters in the word Zodiac can be found or easily made from the Zodiac Killer symbol. The Z, the O, the D, the I, the A, and the C can all be easily made from this symbol. And I'm heavily reminded of the observation that was made by Ray Grant, author of Zodiac Killer Solved, when he talked about how the Zodiac's name, the words and letters from the name Zodiac, can be found in the number pi, 3.14, and so on, because the first several digits of pi will show the alphanumeric value of the word Zodiac. And this is just another example of how the Zodiac Killer, it has something that just is very, very dynamic, very, very nifty, and also it's something where there are different layers of possibility about how and why the Zodiac Killer chose his name and symbol. And as far as this one goes, I mean, I'm always approaching these things with open arms and open eyes, because there is another observation that was made by Dirt Poor Richard about how the Zodiac Killer symbol also easily contains the letter Z in a different way. And this just goes to show that the Zodiac may have had very tactical reasons about why he was choosing his symbol. And I have to give a shout out to Zach M., who also contacted me on Facebook with something that I will be discussing in the next segment. And that is talking about the Zodiac Killer suspects Arthur Lee Allen and Lawrence Kane. And in short, he asked me if I had watched Forrest Haggerty's YouTube series on the Zodiac Killer, and the answer is yes, and if I had talked about it on Zodiac Monday in the past. And the answer to that is yes as well. I followed Forrest Haggerty's videos, and he has a YouTube channel where he talks about all kinds of different subjects. And originally he was planning on doing a 3-part series on the Zodiac Killer, which ultimately ended up being 6 parts at least. At the time of this recording, I think there are 6, unless he chose to add something later on. But I definitely watched the first 6 parts. And the specific request was, will you talk about the observation that Forrest Haggerty made about how the Zodiac Killer could have been a team of 2 people, Arthur Lee Allen and Lawrence Kane. Now, you just heard some things in these book descriptions about how Lawrence Kane can be incorporated into different theories. Arthur Lee Allen is perhaps the most famous Zodiac Killer suspect out there, the one that was discussed in Robert Graysmith's books as well as the Fincher film, and the prime suspect and only suspect to have been named by law enforcement. Lawrence Kane was the suspect of an individual named Harvey Hines, who more or less brought him forward and highly publicized and shared the stories of Lawrence Kane. Being the Zodiac Killer, he also had numerous observations about the case that he used as evidence to show that Lawrence Kane could have been the Zodiac. And this idea that the 2 of them were working together is something that I think may not have the strongest amount of connections, because I'm only doing this in comparison to the other Zodiac Killer suspects out there, because if you look at Arthur Lee Allen and a suspect such as Donald Lee Cheney, those 2 were friends. There is a definitively established relationship between Arthur Lee Allen and Donald Lee Cheney. They knew each other, they don't dispute that. Cheney is even an informant sharing all of these stories about Arthur Lee Allen. But with somebody like Lawrence Kane, I don't quite necessarily understand how that would fit into the picture. Now, another thing that Zach M. also shared in these requests to talk more about Forrest Haggerty's observations would be the connections that Lawrence Kane would have to possible Zodiac crimes, such as the disappearance of Donna Lass, which I should call the murder of Donna Lass in 1970, and the Kathleen Johns incident. in 1970, which was an attempted abduction. And I think that this heavily could fit in with something where there would be multiple participants in an unplanned way. Like, say, for example, you have the Zodiac Killer committing the crimes in 1968, 69, maybe 1970. And I've had the opportunity to interview Jeremy Berthium several times on this channel, which I invite you guys to listen to, particularly the episode Zodiac Killer News Report, Richard Gaikowski edition. And the way that Jeremy laid out his theory was he believed that Lawrence Kane was a serial killer who flew under the radar, and that he attempted the abduction of Kathleen Johns, but she was able to escape and get away. And then Lawrence Kane was just thinking that, hey, somebody escaped, but they went to the police station and they stated that they were abducted by the Zodiac Killer. They saw the famous composite sketch of the Zodiac on the wall, and they thought that that was the same person as him, or that they thought that that person had an extremely similar resemblance to Lawrence Kane. So he begins thinking, hey, I look like this Zodiac Killer. I can commit a crime, get away with it, by blaming it on the Zodiac. So Lawrence Kane murdered Donna Lass, whom he may have known personally by working in the same building with her, the Sierra Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and this is all in September of 1970, mind you. And then about 6 months after the murder of Donna Lass, or the abduction of Donna Lass, a card was mailed that was talking all about the Lake Tahoe region and the Sierra Nevadas and just the peek through the pines card, and that was not an authentic Zodiac communication, but it was written by a different serial killer, Lawrence Kane. He was thinking that I'm going to write this card so people are going to think there's some type of Zodiac Killer connection, but it's a way of dumping the blame on the Zodiac for a crime that he committed. Now, that would be Lawrence Kane working with the Zodiac in an unconnected way. With Arthur Lee Allen, what are the real connections that Lawrence Kane would have to Arthur Lee Allen? They could both have been in Vallejo at the same time. They both could have frequented the same restaurant where Darlene Ferrin worked, the second Zodiac Killer victim, or the victim from the second Zodiac Killer shooting. But I am really not convinced that Lawrence Kane and Arthur Lee Allen knew each other at all. I just provided the preceding material to show you guys an example of how and why there could be these types of theories where there are multiple killers, but they are operating in an unconnected way. And I think it's a very defendable theory to state that Lawrence Kane could have been a serial killer. He is the prime suspect in the murder of Dana Lowell from 1974, so it's entirely possible. But I also want to talk to you guys about the channel New Cokes 2024, which is run by Vincent McConnell. And Vincent put out a video that I was going to do a very big presentation on for this week's Zodiac Monday, and was talking about a communication that was written by the Zodiac Killer. In December of 1969, the Zodiac Killer mailed the Melvin Belli letter, and the Melvin Belli letter stands out from the other Zodiac letters because it has a very different style of handwriting. The Melvin Belli letter is written very neatly, where the other letters are written in a very sloppy manner. And I invite you guys to watch his video on the Melvin Belli letter, which you can find on New Cokes 2024. But I was more caught off by the video that he did under the title of Zodiac Killer Theories, talking about someone who has been a guest on this program in the past named Chad Burke. Zodiac Killer Theories, Chad Burke is in the title. And Chad Burke is somebody whom I've interviewed twice for Black Box Online Radio, and I also talk about his material very frequently. He runs the group The Search for the Zodiac on Facebook, and he was talking about some observations that Chad Burke had made about the Z13 cipher, because that's the primary focus of Chad's observations and his attempts to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery, as well as doing research. He zones in on the Z13 cipher, and he spent about 6.5 years trying to solve that one particular cipher. But this video was talking about some comments that Chad Burke had made about the Zodiac Killer's Lake Herman Road murders. On December 20th of 1968, the Zodiac Killer attacked David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen at Lake Herman Road, and Chad Burke made the statement, apparently in the comments to Vincent McConnell, that he did not believe that the Zodiac Killer was responsible for the Lake Herman Road murders. that he was also looking at a different suspect, and that suspect's name is Michael Schwertfeger. And Vincent was even asking about the exact pronunciation or the exact name of the suspect in question. And I've been hesitant to talk about this person because, as I understand, he is still alive at the time of this recording. But there were actually a couple of different gangs that were in the area at the time. One of them is the Ott Brothers gang, and there's also a gang that was just going on crime sprees. And two of the participants in this gang were named David Magris and Michael Schwertfeger. Do not ask me how to spell that name. I think it's Schwertfdger or something to that effect. But yes, Michael Schwertfeger, I'm guessing that's a German name, just taking a stab at it, was someone who becomes a suspect in the Lake Herman Road murders. And Vincent McConnell, in his own very insightful way, was pointing out that it's really quite odd that the Zodiac Killer would talk about certain things in his letters that do not seem to match up with somebody being a copycat or somebody taking credit for the Lake Herman Road murders when he didn't actually commit them. And that would mostly eliminate suspects like David Walliot, Russell Lott, and Michael Schwertfeger, because there are these gangs that were in the area, sure, but did they actually commit the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen? Because the Zodiac Killer is really able to provide a lot of information that seems like it's coming from the killer, and at the very least, the majority of people do accept that there was one Zodiac Killer. Yes, there are lots of competing theories out there, but what is something that could have been shared by the Zodiac that would indicate that he actually was the Lake Herman Road murderer? And full credit goes to Vincent McConnell, because he's talking about how the Zodiac talked about taping a pencil flashlight to the barrel of his gun. And what Vincent points out is that if somebody were to state that in a letter, and they didn't know what type of firearm the Zodiac was using, what type of gun the Zodiac was using, even if they knew certain things about the brand of the ammo that was being used, but like to state certain things like that they're taping a pencil flashlight to the gun barrel, the way the Zodiac said in one of his early letters. Not all firearms are going to be consistent with that. Not all firearms are going to be suitable for that. Perhaps certain pistols would have a sliding mechanism that would be interfering with the ability to tape a pencil flashlight to those gun barrels. But the Zodiac Killer seemed to be quite certain that that's how he committed the Lake Herman Road murders, that he was able to see the victims in the dark because he had a pencil flashlight taped to the gun barrel, and the type of ammo that was used was .22 caliber long rifle ammo at Lake Herman Road, and the Zodiac Killer was using a .22 caliber firearm. And the .22 caliber is one that Vincent was discussing on his program, and he is a firearms enthusiast, it seems. He knows a lot more about this subject than I do, so I think I can break things down into a layman's approach by simply stating that the .22 caliber pistol would be one where the barrel is protruding outward in a way where it shouldn't interfere with a sliding mechanism of some sorts. So the fact that the Zodiac Killer has this type of awareness to put that into a letter where he just happened to take credit for a crime that was, and he's talking about using a pencil flashlight taped to the gun barrel, and the crime was committed, just so happens to be committed by a firearm that is suitable for that type of configuration, shows that maybe there was a single killer. And if you do watch the New Cokes 2024 videos, you will see very clearly that Vincent is able to arrange things in a way that make a lot of sense. Now, some people out there, like Thomas Henry Horn, author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, who believes that this was all a hoax and people are writing letters taking credit for crimes that they didn't commit, would just point out that maybe the conclusions are not certifiable, but the way that Vincent presents this information, you can follow it in a logical sequence, and you can see how and why these things are really standing out in a way that really brings things down to a single perpetrator. And so many people have this type of experience. I had this type of experience where I wasn't endorsing a multiple killers theory. Instead, I was extremely curious about multiple killers, but ultimately I had to make the decision that yes, now I think there was a single killer who committed the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver. But one more time, the name of the video that you can find on New Coach 2024 is Zodiac Killer Theories, Chad Burke. And I would like to move on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report. And I want to talk about something that I touched upon briefly last week, and that is the Circleville Letters. And I would like to give a shout out to Casbah, who responded by saying that 100% he believes that the Zodiac Killer wrote the Circleville Letters. And the Circleville Letters came in 1977, and they went on for decades. And they're from Circleville, Ohio, but they were actually mailed from Columbus, Ohio to Circleville, Ohio. So we are dealing with a different state. But Casbah said 100% he believed that the Zodiac Killer wrote the Circleville Letters. Now again, this is something where I'm curious about. Like, do you remember how I said I was curious about multiple killers, but I did not endorse that theory? I'm only sharing this as a curiosity. And that is that, look at this observation. At first, you have the Zodiac Killer writing these very sloppy letters in 1969. Then by December of 1969, once you actually get to the Melvin Belli letter that I mentioned, the handwriting's completely different. Maybe the Zodiac was using some type of lined paper as a guide that allowed him to write neatly, the way that Vincent's going to be talking about, or no matter what, the Zodiac Killer altered his handwriting in the Melvin Belli letter, which is an accepted communication by many. Not to mention that the Zodiac Killer had the ability to alter his penmanship in the ciphers. The early ciphers are very neat. Now, some of the unconfirmed ciphers are not as neat, but by the time you get to 1973, you see these unconfirmed letters that come in that may have come from the Zodiac Killer, like the Albany cipher, which shows a different style of writing. And then, by the time you get to 1981, with the Atlanta letter, you have somebody openly stating, this is the Zodiac, I'm just writing in a different style of handwriting. And when you look at the Circleville Letters, in the context of this evolution, you see somebody going from writing with a blend of uppercase and lowercase letters in the 1960s and 70s to writing in all caps in 1977. 1981, someone is stating that they are intentionally altering their handwriting. Then you get to the 1990 Eureka card that also has these all caps letters that are quite similar to the Circleville Letters, and they also have this odd tilting thing, which looks like another intentional disguise. Yes, I completely comprehend how there could be certain types of evolutionary stances in the Zodiac Killer's handwriting, and the Circleville Letters could be something to that. With that being said, what is the skeptical counterbalance? What is the interpretation of the evidence that would indicate that the Zodiac did not write the Circleville Letters? And one of you guys responded to some of my comments in the comment section where it seemed like you were agreeing with some of my skeptical concerns by just stating that the Zodiac Killer was a murderer. The Zodiac Killer was a domestic terrorist. He was not somebody who wrote about the same type of content as the Circleville letter writer, talking about, hey, so-and-so is having an affair with so-and-so. Stay away from this person. Stay away from the Superintendent Gordon Massey. He's having an affair with someone. The Zodiac Killer did not seem to have the same type of infatuation with other people's private lives, like warning people about some type of sexual affair that somebody was having. That type of content, I repeat, content, does not seem like it's up the Zodiac Killer's alley. And on that note, I would like to talk about some of the things that the Zodiac Killer has shared in his letters, because the Zodiac is somebody who's made an enormous amount of claims. And I don't even think this is a controversial statement. I think most people who are listening to this would be in agreement that the Zodiac shared this blend of lies and this blend of possible truth-telling, because we don't necessarily know. But most people think the Zodiac told the truth at some points and he lied at other points. And there are different types of liars out there. And this is something that I've wanted to talk about in the past on previous Zodiac Killer news reports, but I wasn't exactly sure how to tie this into the Zodiac Killer, and I think I finally have a way of arranging it. There are different types of liars out there, so let's go through them, and let's look at how they relates to the Zodiac Killer's activity and behaviors. The first one is the white liar. White lies. White lies are lies that are innocent, they are harmless, they are not important. And did the Zodiac Killer do things like that? Perhaps to a certain extent, but if they're innocent, harmless, and not important, I don't even want to discuss them that much. And the next type of liar is something that we would use in our ordinary discussions. Back when I was growing up in West Virginia as a teenager, we talked about the chronic liar. Chronic, chronology, chronos. And we would differentiate between a chronic liar and a pathological liar by stating that a chronic liar is someone who lies frequently. A pathological liar is somebody who acts it out. Like they put forward a series of actions to continue the lie. Somebody who's making an email account under a fake name, someone who's making phone calls, pretending to be somebody else, who is carrying out the hoax, who is just putting on this giant charade, and they're trying to do specific actions to make people think that they are indeed living out this thing which they are not. Now, that might not be the best definition of a pathological liar, and in fact, we're going to see in this segment that's not even a good definition of a pathological liar. But let's start with the chronic liar, somebody who lies frequently. I think the Zodiac Killer did that. I think the Zodiac Killer did tell the truth at certain points. Number one, I think he actually did tape the flashlight to his gun barrel, and that's how he was able to see at Lake Herman Road. And one of the pieces of evidence for this is the Zodiac Killer also carried a flashlight at Blue Rock Springs. It's just he was using a different type of firearm. Maybe he thought that it wasn't necessary to use the pencil flashlight, or maybe he wanted to have something that was a little bit easier to control. Maybe he just did it because of his own choice. Maybe he just did it because of his own decision, and we aren't even necessarily sure why. But I think the Zodiac Killer told the truth at certain points, but I do think he was a chronic liar. He lied frequently. Now, the next type of lying, let's just go back to pathological lying. Pathological lying is when somebody is telling lies, and the term pathology can often be associated with disease. It's almost as if this person has a medical condition that is encouraging them to lie. But when you read certain websites, all of these psychological websites will have different definitions. And one thing, though, that I have found very frequently about pathological liars is they will tell lies in situations that do not necessarily benefit them, but they are just still trying to lie and deceive. And a lot of these psychological discussions that people have really present pathological lying in a negative light, about somebody who is trying to lie, trying to deceive, and you can even carry it with some of these informal discussions that we had when I was a teenager about how this person is trying to act out a certain persona, if you will, and to deceive people. Yes, absolutely, I think the Zodiac Killer was like that, but I don't think that's the be-all, end-all. I think the Zodiac Killer definitely did that stuff, but I don't think that that's the concluding point. The next type of lying to talk about is the compulsive liar. And the compulsive liar is somebody who is telling lies in situations that are not very serious. And I think the best way to describe it, based on reading a bunch of random websites and their definition of a compulsive liar, is it's somebody who does it to maintain the balance. They tell lies because they think they're telling people what they want to hear. They think that they're telling people things which might avoid punishments for them. So it's not a white lie. It's not something that's done in an innocent way. But the compulsive liar is telling these types of stories because they want people to not get angry with them. They don't want to be punished. They don't want to deal with negative consequences. And also, it could simply be about maintaining the balance. It could be done because they don't want to upset someone. And I think it's really interesting because Dr. Lee Meller talked about this in one of the episodes of the Citizen Detective podcast, which you could hear on YouTube for free. He talked about how the big 5 personality traits include honesty as a subfacet of agreeableness, but agreeableness doesn't equal honesty. There's a different model called Hexaco, which separates honesty and agreeableness. And I completely agree with that because The agreeable person, the person who's just trying to agree and get along with things, might often do something that is deceptive or dishonest to maintain the agreeable balance. This all comes back to compulsive lying. Did the Zodiac Killer act like that? I don't think so. I really don't think the Zodiac Killer was someone who is trying to maintain any type of balance or is telling lies because he doesn't want people to get angry. I think it's the exact opposite. I think the Zodiac wanted these type of angry and fearful emotions to come out of other people. And that brings us to the next type of lying, and that is sociopathic lying. And sociopathic lying is quite similar to the pathological lying aspects. It's somebody who is telling lies to manipulate someone, usually for a destructive reason. And it's not only for manipulation. It can also be done to cause emotional pain. It can be done as a type of emotional sadism, where somebody is actually trying to hurt people, and they're trying to spin a web of lies that is going to hurt people, but by doing that, they're doing it in a deceptive way. Was the Zodiac Killer like that? Absolutely. This is what I think the Zodiac Killer was. I think the Zodiac was beyond a pathological liar. I think the Zodiac Killer was a sociopathic liar. Saying all these things about, oh, I'm going to detonate a bomb that's going to kill a bunch of people. I'm going to wipe out a school bus. School children make nice targets. Never mind that the Zodiac Killer didn't actually follow through with those threats. I don't think there's enough evidence to state that the Zodiac Killer was actually going to follow through with those threats. So that to me indicates that the Zodiac Killer was somebody who was trying to create the image of terror and fear, and this all comes back to the concept of he was trying to do things that were manipulative, that were harmful, that were trying to hurt people emotionally, spinning the web of lies to create emotional damage within people. This is sociopathic lying. In my own unprofessional opinion, based on my own unprofessional observations, this appears to be sociopathic lying to me. But I love to know what you guys think about the different types of liars, and I mean, you can even tie this into some other things like that are not Zodiac related if you want to in the comment section down below. But what do you think of my assessment of this with the white liars, with the compulsive liars, chronic liars, pathological liars, and sociopathic liars? I would love to know what you guys think about this assessment. I think that the Zodiac Killer was a sociopathic liar, which is really interesting because in Dr. Todd Grande's assessment of the Zodiac Killer, which you can watch on YouTube for free, and I also did a couple of responses to that here on Black Box Online Radio, when he was discussing the Zodiac Killer's psychological state, he said, most likely the Zodiac Killer was a narcissist, but there is insufficient evidence to state that the Zodiac Killer was a sociopath or had a sociopathic disorder like antisocial personality disorder. But the more that I read about the Zodiac Killer and the more that I learn about the Zodiac Killer, I'm experiencing this shift toward believing that, yes, the Zodiac was a sociopath. Yes, the Zodiac may have experienced antisocial personality disorder. He may have had that disorder. And if anything, I think that the evidence is quite clear that the Zodiac was a sociopathic liar, unless by some stroke of delusional fortune on the part of the Zodiac, he was telling the truth about all of those threats that he didn't follow up on. Maybe there was some reason why he didn't wipe out the bus full of kids. Maybe there was some reason why he didn't follow through on his terroristic threats that we don't know about. So those are other points where I think that the Zodiac may have kept to himself. Compulsive lying, perhaps? No, perhaps not. I think the Zodiac Killer was a sociopathic liar. But I would love to know what you guys think, and you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Anybody can support this channel with buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also really shared a lot of content that goes into the creation of Black Box Online Radio episodes, particularly the Cooper Friday episodes. And I apologize to everybody here on Black Box Online Radio listening to this episode right now. There was not an episode of Cooper Friday that came out last weekend, but everything should be back on schedule for this week. Zodiac Monday talking about the Zodiac Killer, Ripper Wednesday talking about Jack the Ripper, and Cooper Friday talking about D.B. Cooper. And I've also made the announcement that it is now January at the time of this recording, but I'm hoping to bring back something that used to air on the weekends, and that was the regular segment that I did about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996. And there is a lot of information and there are a lot of resources that I would like to explore and to reignite that series. So please look out for some future episodes on the story of JonBenet Ramsey coming in March of this year, or if you're listening to this in the future, feel free to check out some of the JonBenet content here on Black Box Online Radio. And the next shout out we have is going to River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is another regular and consistent supporter. Absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for sharing with us. I really appreciate everything that you've done for the channel, and I can't say thank you enough. And our next shout out goes to CZ Guy. CZ Guy has also joined the ranks and become another regular and consistent supporter, and I appreciate everything as well. And our next shout out on buymeacoffee.com comes to us from someone, and it just says someone, but this is one where I think it's classic Chevy Cat, right? And it says, listening to your September 16th, 2024 episode, and you talk about the Nancy Drew channel being better than you. Nope, not. I'm catching up on your shows now, Ned, and I gotta tell you, great content. I can't imagine how you do it. Seriously. Well, thank you so much for that, and, it just shocks me that I literally blinked, and it seems like 3 years have gone by since I started the Zodiac Killer news report. Maybe it's actually 2 years, and I'm not really sure, but I started the Zodiac Killer news report around this time in 2022, and it's now 2025. The years go by, and with each year, part of me thinks that we are getting closer to solving the Zodiac Killer mystery, and part of me thinks that we are getting further away. But the Nancy Drew channel is one that I have a lot in common with, because I also follow the story of JonBenet Ramsey, and there are lots of videos about that on the Nancy Drew channel. There are also lots of videos about the Zodiac Killer, and even about some other subjects. The Nancy Drew guy does things in a very different way than I do, and perhaps what I was discussing on this episode from September was that that guy looks at a lot of things like old newspaper articles, does things like going through old yearbooks, going through old registries, and there is a lot of painstaking research that goes into his videos. Whereas Black Box Online Radio definitely explores more things like, psychology and the books that have been written. And I was asked about this on Jerome's channel, the French Wrecking Crew, which has since been renamed Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. And there is a regular panel discussion episode that comes out every Monday about the Zodiac Killer. And on one of the panel discussion shows, there was an individual named Megan who was one of the participants, and she just asked the panel, what are your strengths, or what are the areas that you focus on the most when you're exploring the Zodiac Killer mystery or other true crime cases? And my response was psychology and literature, looking at the ideas that have been presented and published, that being literature, and psychology all goes back to some of these technical terms and technical arrangements of human behavior that have been shared, and psychological statements that have been made available to the general public. Wow, that was a big giant sentence. In short, I read about psychology and I try to link it to true crime. Maybe that's a better way of putting it and a better way of linking it all together. But I think that the channels are just different, but I have such a great admiration for people who do the painstaking research where they're going to spend hours flipping through directories trying to find a name that could have some type of connection. There is a certain amount of mental endurance that they have that I think is very noteworthy. And the next shout out that I would like to give is to an individual named DNA King, who actually sent me something at the Black Box Online Radio email address. You can write me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. I'm your host, Black Box Ned. And DNA King said he tried to donate on buymeacoffee.com but wasn't unable to do so. I was actually asking if there's another way to donate, like the Cash App or Venmo or something. And as for now, Really, it's just the super chats when I go live, super thanks on YouTube and buymeacoffee.com. And one of the reasons why, and this might sound like a very bizarre reason to a lot of you, is that there was a D.B. Cooper researcher out there named Dan Ryder who made this massive commercial at the end of his videos where he's talking about his Cash App and Venmo and all those things. And I don't really want to take on some type of really tacky advertisement thing like that. So, I mean, I'm not going to be throwing around stuff like PayPal or anything like that. I really just appreciate that you want to listen to the show and that you want to support Black Box Online Radio. And thank you so much, DNA King, though, for wanting to support Black Box Online Radio and Zodiac Monday. I really mean that. And our next shout out goes to Art Banksy, who has been contributing in a different way. Art Banksy has provided a lot of the images that you see going by on the screen here, and I also would like to let you know that some of these are available on the Instagram page, Not Ray Johnson. You can find the Black Box Online Radio fan page on the channel, Not Ray Johnson. And I would like to move on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report, and I'm going to be discussing something that was shared in a Facebook group called The Zodiac Killer and Me by Jeff Thornton. And Jeff Thornton and his wife Melissa Rose Tappa were on the website ZodiacKillerBomb.com, and their Zodiac suspect is an individual named Loring Dale Hill, who was a career naval officer who was a helicopter pilot and naval aviation mechanic. And what they wanted to do is really zone in on the clues that the Zodiac Killer could have shared in his letters that would have indicated that he was in the Navy, even before you get to Loring Dale Hill as a Zodiac Killer suspect, looking at the naval clues. And one of them first is that the naval flags could have been used as inspirations for the Zodiac Killer ciphers. And they posted a graphic of the USS Enterprise New Year's graphic. We are in the month of January, so New Year's just happened recently, and they're talking about the similarities between these symbols, and specifically some unconfirmed communications that were written by someone, possibly the Zodiac Killer, but unconfirmed communications called the Scorpion ciphers, which came out in the early 90s. In 1991, there were 5 Scorpion ciphers, which I've been talking about a lot recently on Black Box Online Radio. But as far as the Scorpion ciphers go, they do remain unconfirmed, and a lot of people believe that the Zodiac Killer learned coding in the Navy. They even talked about this on the History Channel's The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer show, where they were looking at how the symbols that the Zodiac used could have been naval symbols. Yes, lots of people think that, but there's another more specific reason that I wanted to share with you guys why they were bringing this up. And it was Jeff Thornton who posted this in the group, The Zodiac Killer and Me, when he talks about how there is a naval call or naval expression that is Sierra Hotel. And it's a way of saying very good that's used in naval lingo. And I already told you once in this episode, the Zodiac Killer or somebody of a similar mindset abducted and murdered Donna Lass, who was working at this Sierra Tahoe Hotel in 1970 when she was abducted. And did the Zodiac Killer choose that location because of his naval background? That's what they are trying to assess in the group The Zodiac Killer and Me. And there's also another naval phrase, according to Google, that says Kilo Sierra is from more initials of a naval saying, which means very good. Kilo Sierra or Sierra Hotel. And these all come from the alphabet that is used in the military, a phonetic alphabet that has a type of meaning. And you guys all know this, you've heard it all before. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel, India, Juliet, Kilo, Lima, Mike, November, Oscar, Papa, Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, Tango, Uniform, Victor, Whiskey, X-Ray, Yankee, Zulu. Alright, so you guys have heard that alphabet before, or at the very least you've heard some of the different names. As far as hotel goes, I just remember being so surprised when I learned about that hotel was the the word that's connected to H in the military, because that was just something that caught me off guard a little bit. Sierra is also one that surprised me a little bit. But if anything, I think this is a very interesting observation. The only thing is, there could be other reasons why the Zodiac Killer chose the Sierra Tahoe Hotel and Casino, and a very big reason is some people think the Zodiac was specifically targeting Donna Lass because she lived in San Francisco at the time. She worked at Letterman General Hospital at the time the Zodiac Killer was operating in 1969. Then in 1970, in the summer of 1970, she moves to the Lake Tahoe area. So they think the Zodiac Killer followed her to Lake Tahoe. And would that mean so much that he was targeting her because of the Sierra Tahoe Hotel, Sierra Hotel type of naval lingo? Well, that wouldn't have anything to do with the hotel, because if she were specifically targeted because of pre-existing information, she didn't even work at the hotel at the time. So we see that there are competing theories. And we don't know who murdered Donna Lass. We don't even know if the Zodiac Killer murdered Donna Lass. So I have to say that this one is going into the pile of uncertainty. And right now I would like to give a shout out to David Berman, who is the author of the book The Ninth Victim. And this is a book that talks a lot about the Richard Speck case from the 1960s. And in 1966, Richard Speck committed the South Chicago Massacre, or some people believe that Richard Speck committed the South Chicago Massacre, where 8 student nurses were stabbed to death on one night. One person who disputes this is B.D. Salerno, whom I've interviewed on this channel, and B.D. Salerno is the author of the book Richard Speck and the 8 Nurses Deconstructing a Mass Murder. And I only said for the year of 2023, that was one of my favorite interviews, but just based on the flow of the discussion and based on our exchange of ideas, sure. David Berman is of a very similar mindset. But the reason why I want to talk to you guys about this is twofold. Number one, I think all things Richard Speck are Zodiac related, because I've said this once and I'll say it again. I think that a real reason why the Zodiac Killer was committing the Lake Berryessa stabbing was he was taking influences from the South Chicago Massacre and the official narrative that had been shared and publicized. Once again, the Lake Berryessa stabbing took place in 1969, and the Zodiac Killer committed the Lake Berryessa stabbing, but the Richard Speck murders took place in 1966, approximately 3 years earlier, and there's just very similar dialogue that is being used where Richard Speck allegedly told the victims, he's holding them up at gunpoint and carrying a knife, saying, "All I want's your money, I'm just trying to get to New Orleans." The Zodiac held the victims up at gunpoint and used a knife, but said, "All I want's your money, I'm just trying to get to Mexico." And in both instances, the victims are tied up prior to the stabbings. But the real reason why I want to get to this segment here on Zodiac Monday is David Berman was talking about some material in his book, The Ninth Victim, that is very similar to a comment that was left by one of you guys in the comment section on a previous Zodiac Monday. Somebody had asked me, what do I think of Randy Kraft as a Zodiac Killer suspect? Randy Kraft was a serial killer called the Scorecard Killer, who did terrible things to people, very vicious things to people. He would castrate men, he would sodomize men, he was a sexual predator who targeted males. He was a homosexual serial killer who operated within his orientation, and he would sodomize men with bizarre objects. And somebody said, it's really quite odd that these types of discussions happen with certain serial killers. It's really quite odd that certain serial killer stories get popularized, whereas others do not. And absolutely, I had never heard of Randy Kraft until I was in my 30s. I didn't grow up hearing about him the way that we hear about John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy and the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper. And in the book, The Ninth Victim, I repeat, The Ninth Victim, there is a lot of discussions about John Wayne Gacy as well in the intro sections of the book. And I think some of the reasons could be a possible explanation as to why certain serial killer stories get popularized and others do not. And this is very theoretical stuff, and this is going to be a blend of observations from David Berman and myself from other sources. But I want to be clear that this isn't something that I can bring into a court of law, but why do stories like John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown, become more popular, and stories like Randy Kraft, the Scorecard Killer, become less popular? One theory is that this is the actions of people trying to hide in plain sight. They compose a fictitious narrative surrounding this serial killer, and they use it as a type of cover-up for other illegal activities that were present at the time. The documentary Boys for Sale says some very similar things that David Berman was discussing in his book, The Ninth Victim, about John Wayne Gacy. Gacy was convicted of 33 murders, and with the majority of the victims, he buried the bodies of the male victims in his crawl space under the house. All of this stuff is disputed by David Berman in his book, just thinking that John Wayne Gacy didn't murder that many people. He didn't actually commit all of the murders. He committed some of the murders, just not all of them. But the reason why that the body count for John Wayne Gacy would be so high, period, even if he murdered 15 people or 16 people, was he was finding his victims from a prostitution ring, from a male prostitution ring that was also used by other political, local, and social elites of the area. In short, they wanted to commit the arrest of John Wayne Gacy, blame him for a whole bunch of crimes, and also they wanted to use this as a type of hiding in plain sight way where they were going to publicize this story and just make it look like, oh, John Wayne Gacy's a terrible person, he did this all by himself, to cover up the illegal sexual activities of everybody else who was involved. And that's just one theory. That's just one theory. But the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, it's all the same thing, because Jeffrey Dahmer was also using male victims. And he also talks about going to meet male victims in bars and so on. And this gets connected to another set of serial killer stories involving Herb Baumeister, the I-70 Strangler, because it's reported that Herb Baumeister and Jeffrey Dahmer used to frequent the same gay bars looking for victims and so on, or just trying to meet men, period. And it's like there's this type of network that's going on where certain people are using, well, let's just say that, it goes back to rings of operation where certain people would be committing real crimes. Like, these are real serial killers. It's just they get blamed for a whole bunch of other crimes that they may not have even committed because they're trying to cover up illegal actions of other people, elite people, people who have stronger influences, who have more power and the ability to cover up these types of actions. And I think that David Berman is in agreement with a lot of these different observations. Now, with Richard Speck, I'm going to have to go through this book a lot more to get a stronger handle on this type of information. But I just wanted to provide one type of explanation about why certain stories like Gacy and Dahmer become more popular, and individuals like Randy Kraft, the Scorecard Killer, do not. With the Zodiac Killer, I think it's a little bit different because the Zodiac created the persona. John Wayne Gacy was the killer clown, sure, but that wasn't a real part of his attempt to publicize his own story. In fact, I don't even think John Wayne Gacy publicized his own story. Let's be clear about that. Yes, he's Pogo the Clown, but if anything, that's just something silly that he did to distract people from the fact that he was a murderous scumbag. And with Jeffrey Dahmer also, he's trying to conceal his actions when he has like these mummified parts of human remains that he's hiding in his Milwaukee apartment. He's trying to conceal that. He's trying to hide that. By Jeffrey Dahmer's own admission, he would have gotten away with it if he hadn't been such an alcoholic, if he hadn't been drinking so much and became sloppy. So these guys are trying to hide things. The Zodiac Killer? No, absolutely not. The Zodiac Killer is broadcasting his message. He is publicizing his own story. This is the Zodiac speaking. I'm the murderer. Like, that's more or less what he's saying in multiple communications. So the Zodiac wanted attention, and he contacted the press. He asked the press to publish his letters and ciphers. Is that hiding in plain sight? Not really. I think that's, well, I've already told you, I think that's sociopathic lying. And I hope by the end of this episode you're probably going to be in agreement with that the Zodiac is trying to do what did I say about sociopathic lying? Spinning a web of lies to manipulate, usually for a malicious reason, and also creating emotional harm, emotional damage, and emotional sadism. That's what the Zodiac Killer is doing. So that's what I think he was all about. With another story like Ted Bundy, for example, Ted Bundy is a widely discussed serial killer, but I think Ted Bundy is famous because, again, the media coverage surrounding Ted Bundy and his trial, but also Ted Bundy became the foundation for a lot of our understandings about serial killers. It's a starting point, not to mention there are so many interviews with Ted Bundy. There is Ted Bundy in the courtroom, Ted Bundy in the suit and tie, and so on. I think that it's just the amount of media that we have about Ted Bundy. But I would love to know what you guys think about how and why certain serial killer stories get publicized and shared, and why other ones become less popular, such as Randy Kraft, the scorecard killer, who may have murdered as many as 61 people. Dean Corll, the Candyman, another very torturous serial killer, also not a very widely discussed story. And there are also serial killers that very few people may have heard about. The Bayou Strangler, for example, from Louisiana, Maury Travis from St. Louis, David Parker Ray, the Toy Box Killer. People who follow true crime closely will know these names, but as far as the general public, they would have no idea what you're talking about. And the final thing that I have for you guys on this week's episode is related to an ongoing discussion that we've been having here on Black Box Online Radio. From time to time, you might see the Crime Talk graphic going by on the screen. Crime Talk is a show that is hosted by Scott Reich, who is a practicing defense attorney, and he made the bold statement that when a defendant takes the stand in a jury trial, it all comes down to whether or not the jury likes the defendant, whether they like their personality and their character and they think that they're truthful and honest. That is everything in the jury trial. Another statement from him is that most defendants who take the stand get convicted because their own words get used against them. And I had the opportunity to watch the movie The Silent Witness with Dermot Mulroney, which I think is actually a made-for-TV movie, but it is a courtroom drama. The reason why I watched it is because it was called The Silent Witness Zodiac. It had Zodiac in parentheses, and I was like, oh, there's this movie about the Zodiac? Or just maybe something Zodiac related? No, it actually had nothing to do with the Zodiac Killer or anything to do with any type of Zodiac. I'm not sure why that word was in the title, but it was called The Silent Witness. And there was another statement that was shared that completely supported everything that Scott Reich had talked about on his program. And that was that if there is a murder trial and the defendant, the accused, shows even the smallest amount of anger on the witness stand, then the jury is going to visualize the defendant bashing in somebody's skull, or whatever type of method is used, like the Zodiac Killer stabbing and shooting the victims. If the smallest amount of anger is showed on the witness stand, that's how the jury is going to visualize everything. And I think that that is just a supporting point to everything. It all just comes down to perception. And it's very saddening because people aren't going to be evaluating the evidence. They're going to be evaluating someone's character and their personality and their likability. Who cares about likability? How about who actually committed the crimes? But I would love to know what you guys think about anything that has been discussed in this week's Zodiac Monday. You can put your ideas in the comments section down below. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook at Black Box Online Radio or my personal Facebook, Ned DeHaan. There is blackboxned88 on Instagram. And it's my understanding now that TikTok is now back in the US. There's a page for Black Box Online Radio on TikTok under the name blackboxned88, but I really don't use TikTok too much. It's only for posting reels and shorts. And that will be all for me. Goodbye.